Let's start with what the ANC party leader, Musalia Mudavadi, had to say alongside Kalonzo Musyoka, the party leader of Wiper, in as far as this fight against corruption is concerned.
Mtu anapatikana na 2 billion na ni governor. Unaona lifestyle na change. Hiyo ni pesa ambayo ingesaidia wananchi.
The only thing that seems rather obvious is that the Kenyan taxpayer is about to lose yet again billions of shillings in hugely suspect circumstances.
Right, so you hear Musalia Mudavadi giving an account of what he feels is happening in government. Of course, the headline of the Standard there, handcuffs not handshake policy. And yes, you said that we are almost a year. It will be 1 year, 9th of March, 9th of next month, since the political turmoil stopped. But where do you rate us in as far as fighting this graft? So many arrests, so many prosecutions, convictions, not so much.
1 year after the handshake.
Let me put it this way, as bluntly as I can. We are all corrupt and will never change. You know, the fight against corruption, I was seeing an old clip of 1968 where the government was making pledges and pledges and pledges. We are going to continue rotting in corruption because of interest, special interest. Corruption in this country, you know, it's like we sleep with corruption, we eat corruption, we wake up, we work with it. It is the same every single day. Any government policy, any government laws, when you hear these cabinet secretaries talk, sometimes you think they're completely disconnected to this one. One of them will come out and say, okay, we've come up with new policies, that there's no more importation of used cars, 7 years. And I'm like, wow, that is actually good. We're moving into new anti-dumping laws. And then all of a sudden, it's deja vu. They start saying, we are going to be importing what? Used trains. You know, some as old as 25 years old.
The irony. Let
us be honest. In fact, I believe that what Musalia Mudavadi was saying, and I don't normally agree with him 100%, but this time I agree with him. It's about time that we now, you know, sort of like interpret what this handshake all means. Nama is corrupt, you know. In fact, today we are going to visit the people at Solai. In fact, immediately after this, we are going to Solai. Okay. This government has failed to implement any laws that are passed by either the National Assembly or the Senate or by Parliament. So we will never win the war against corruption. I have to say, you know, in hindsight.
So should we stop there?
No, I have to say, if we follow like the steps that someone like Kinoti is following, you know, making sure that he goes after these people who are corrupt, I think we can have some hope. But as we stand right now, unless we have other Kinotis and people who come out and, you know, and say, literally, we are actually going to fight corruption with all the mighty powers we have, we are not going anywhere. We'll start the same story again today. Next year, it is in our meat and our bones.
Right. Wow. Senator Kajwang, has the handshake undermined the fight for, rather the fight against corruption?
It has actually made it easier to deal with corruption. Really? Because in the past, if we talked about the 96 billion that is being flagged as probably misapplied in dams, Chris would be told, nyinyi watu wa NASA, you can never see anything good. In the past, if we said that a CS has received kickbacks, we would be accused of maybe, we would be told that you don't like a CS because it comes from a certain region. Now, we can deal with corruption without those hang-ups of political party affiliations. But the problem with corruption in this country, you can win a war using artillery, but sometimes you win a war by talking and softly appealing to the people through propaganda, and other strategies. We are going after corruption with artillery. And I've just been wondering whether that is the only effective solution. Musalia Mudavadi wants us to go after corruption with artillery. And he's right. Every Kenyan wants to see the corrupt in jail. And that's why he's talking of handcuffs. What is our history in conviction? Because every other time we see DCI and DPP talking very loudly, the other time when they were at the corruption conference, I hope it was an anti-corruption conference.
It was a corruption conference.
Because you can't do a corruption conference. I mean, it's such a misplaced thing.
Governance.
They said a lot of things. But the judiciary said, give us evidence and we will determine these issues. Must all corrupt cases lead into a conviction? I tell you, as the way Ledama says, if you are to jail everyone who's corrupt, including that guy I saw in the morning bribing a policeman, all our jails will be full. We now need to have a conversation. How do we have alternative ways of dealing with this matter? In fact, it gets to a point where you are almost convinced that you need a special tribunal to deal with this. So, though EACC was conceived as a part of a quasi, tribunal to deal with graft. But EACC, under the leadership of the former CEO, was an utmost failure.
So you feel that the handshake hasn't undermined the war on corruption, but then a Kenyan would ask, in the past 1 year since that handshake that we saw on Harambee steps, who has been jailed? What examples can you give to Kenyans to say, yes, the handshake has not undermined the fight of corruption?
Look at in the last 1 year, you're finding serving cabinet secretaries being required to record statements.
Right.
In the last 1 year, if you count the number of scandals, in fact, even in just one newspaper alone, you've got, I don't know, 200 billion National Irrigation Board. 200 billion is 2/3 of what counties get, all the 47 counties in this country. You've got 98 billion in terms of dams. You've got, I don't know how many other billions from Galana Kulalu. You've got all sorts of scandalous and high-level and high-sounding graft in the last 1 year. At least we've been able to have a conversation on that without Raila being called Mganga or being called Mtu wa Fitina. I think, and that's why I was saying that 1 year after the handshake, we need an audit to find out if this pace and this favorable environment that we have created for nation building, whether we have taken advantage of it or people are using it just for purposes of 2022, or people are using the silence of the stalwarts of the opposition like Raila Odinga to continue stealing, looting, and enriching themselves. But yes, handcuffs, we need to see. But then the broader conversation, the ethos, the values, the culture in this country where people want to be rich and they don't want to account. They want to deposit 1 million shillings, but they don't want to say where that 1 million shillings came from. That is a culture that we need to deal with for us to effectively wage the war on corruption.
Two senators from the same party, right?
Yes.
No. Very different views. He feels that we won't win the war. He feels that the strategies are better.
Let me just say one more thing. I think, and I like what Senator Kajwang has said.
Can you allow me?
Yes, before I forget, just allow me not to forget this point.
Okay, when you're given your chance, you should maximize.
On behalf of the corrupt.
Now, the issue is this.
Dr. Chris, the question I want you to respond to is, so all this happening, but what strategies can you employ? Because as he says, yes, you cannot jail everyone and take them to jail. During the anti-corruption conference, not corruption conference, the Chief Justice was saying that you don't need to arraign dozens of people, just arraign a few, let the others be prosecution witnesses. In your view, what are these strategies that we need to employ to ensure that it's faster to prosecute a corruption case and determine it?
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to say that the handshake has added a lot of value as far as this country is concerned. It has brought peace, and peace has brought investments. In fact, the latest report of the World Bank shows now Kenya provides a very conducive environment for business. So that is a big plus. If the handshake wasn't there, the peace, tranquility we're enjoying right now wouldn't be there. Aspects of inflation now, you can see inflation is now managed, under managed levels. The issues of security, we can say it's not that bad. So this handshake, when it comes to fight against corruption, before the handshake, we didn't have a lot of these arrests here and there. So it is after the handshake that we have seen at least people are being arraigned in court. If you do a trend analysis, just do a trend analysis and see in the middle of the handshake. Because that was the time when one is arrested, they want to know which part of the political divide you come from. Recently, you saw the issue of the Samburu. Samburu governor is a governor of Jubilee. If it were not the issue of the handshake, I'm sure this matter wouldn't have come to the public.
All right.
So right now, as we let me finish because I'm not
finished. Because there's a caller on the line. You don't
okay. Let's get the caller, then I'll come back.
Right. Elkanah, you're calling in from Isili. Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, go ahead. What's your comment or question?
I want to ask maybe why the government has failed to fight against corruption. Who is to blame? Is the president or the government in because we have seen the corrupt government, but will handshake succeed to fight against corruption?
Right. So your thought is you'd like to know if...
Asking a question.
will the handshake still to fight against corruption? Because the corruption is still in
Okay, I think the question is asking, is the effectiveness of this handshake, bearing in mind that corruption cases are still being heard of, people are still siphoning resources every other day?
Exactly, I was coming to that. Now, coming to Parliament, Parliament is a house of legislation. Many times when a matter comes on the floor of the House, people are debating based on the political divide that you come from.
Yes.
Right now, when you come to Parliament, we are seeing parliamentarians legislating objectively with the interests of the public good of the common mwananchi. It's not an issue where you come from NASA or you come from Jubilee, no. And right now, we've seen even the Jubilee members of Parliament, those who are sycophants, who could just go and rubber stamp, they are now questioning some of the bad manners. Right now, we are trying to scrutinize the budget policy statement. This is whereby the government brings in the key priorities when it comes to budgeting. When you go to the floor or in those committees, you'll see the Jubilee people have woken up there on the forefront, questioning ABCD. Before the handshake, such cases were not there. So the handshake has really added value as far as legislation is concerned, as far as oversight is concerned, as far as representation is concerned. But now coming to the issue of handcuffs, I think we need to understand the context where Mudavadi is coming from. Right. From the handshake, we know handcuffs is an indicator that the culprit has been arrested or whatever the case. But before we come to the issue of the handcuffs, the issue is now with the judiciary. The judiciary can only make a judgment based on the evidence. Maybe what we need to do is to improve on the capacity of our DPPs and maybe the DCI in terms of investigation. So whatever comes whatever comes before the judge should be something of substance. Right. But now when they appear before, and the Chief Justice mentioned about this, because they do judgment based on the evidence. They are bringing weak evidence that they cannot convict somebody.
Dr. Chris, I hear what you're saying, but then the DPP and the DCI say that they always give proper evidence, watertight evidence. It is then the judiciary that lets them down. I'll give you one example, and I hear what you're saying, that right now in Parliament, political parties such as Jubilee are at the forefront asking questions. But then take a look at last week. Nicholas Smith, one of the men the British who was part of the Chicken Gate scandal, prosecuted, and if my memory serves me right, as of last week, he's finished his 3-year sentence. Here in Kenya, we're yet to see any prosecution from the Chicken Gate scandal.
Absolutely. The DPP. The DPP is the one in charge of prosecution. The DCI is the one to do investigations and bring the evidence before the courts. So when we talk about the weak points here, we are talking about the DPP and the DCI. You must bring evidence that when the court looks at it like this, it's watertight. I think, and they can go for appeal in case they are not happy with the judgment.
Let's take this conversation forward.
My view is very different.
Okay, go ahead.
I think all 3 levels of government have got to work together. If we are going to win this war on corruption, we must work together. We in the legislative arm of government must begin by looking at our legislations. Are they discriminatory in nature? And we divorce this special interest. Because when you look at the anti-corruption laws right now, they're very discriminatory. If a state officer is questioned, is accused of corruption, he's forced to resign. If a public officer is accused of corruption, he does not. No, it's a fact. These are facts.
Let him finish.
I'll put it this way very clearly.
Okay.
In fact, let me demystify it for my good friend to understand this, what I'm talking about. If you look at the treatment of cabinet secretary versus the treatment of governors, it is completely different. When the president, when certain cabinet secretaries were accused of corruption, the president asked them to step aside. They did, and they never came back. When, on the other hand, a governor is accused of corruption, he will go to court. He will even spend a few nights in court, but he'll come back still as the governor. So the first thing we need to do is we need to align that legislation. State versus public. That's issue number 1. Let me proceed. Because I want to prosecute my matter in a way that is going to be fair. There's no way we in the legislative arm of government can say, no, me, I'm a public officer. If I'm accused of corruption, I continue staying there. No, you're accused of corruption, you also step aside. So that's number 1. Number 2, when we look at the way the DCI and the DPP work, one of my biggest problems is that sometimes there are certain, the police in itself, the police is made up of the DCI, but when you look at the way the OCPD and the OCS are dealing with the investigation, they are not equipped to do so. So what they need to do is to leave the work of investigation to be done by the DCI. And then once the DCI is satisfied that he's got enough evidence, he can then pass they file to the DPP for the DPP to go and prosecute the matter.
I think
just before you respond, let's listen to Patrick. Just a moment. Patrick Onzere from Likuyani, Kakamega. Good morning, Patrick. What's your view? Did you lose him? Well, it appears like we lost him. And I want to pick it up from where he left, that he is talking of state officers being treated differently. You may not agree with what the law provides, but the practical sense is actually true, because you look at Principal Secretary Lilian Omolo, NYS scandal. She's no longer appears.
She's out.
Even if she has not been fired, she's not in office. Richard Lesiampe, Principal Secretary crop
Agriculture.
It's the Agriculture Ministry, but the department is crop development or something like that. He's out of office. Mohamed Sozuri, state officer, chairperson of the National Land Commission. He was taken to court, but he came back until the expiry of his term, even though he was not able to execute his duties. Governance in office, taken to court, still in office. What does the law say?
No, this big word called jurisprudence. You see, the fight against the mafia in the United States, even during the Prohibition era, there was a lot of crime. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of bootleg, a lot of mafia networks. But it took those persons involved in the criminal justice system to take a different perspective on issues. The law is about interpretation. The law is about, it depends on from what angle are you looking at it. You would find that in the past, the judges and magistrates were captured by the mafia. And the magistrates could interpret the law in a manner that would benefit those gangsters and criminals. But there was a fundamental shift at some point. And I remember it was Kennedy, who was the Attorney General following the death of his brother, who took a very firm position when he was Attorney General of the United States of America to encourage the judicial officers at federal level and even at state level to take a different approach. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this is anybody bail is a constitutional right.
Right.
And we always argue that even if he was found with a knife, with blood, having murdered me, he would get bail because it's a constitutional right. The manner in which the judiciary and those involved in the criminal justice system are looking at things is not going to help us. We have this concept of innocence until guilt is proven. Yes. But we saw persons accused of murder, displacements of persons, rape, and international crimes. We declared that they were innocent until they were proven guilty. The jurisprudence, the legal philosophy, the kind of values that we are building in this country are not going to help us at this particular point in time, because one would have argued that even those gangsters of the mafia were all innocent until proven guilty, but it took a different approach. But finally, what kind of hope does a Kenyan child get when he hears that the governor of a county declares on TV that we used to smoke bang somewhere, or that I escaped from jail and I've never gone back? What kind of message are we passing? This thing is all about leadership also. As they say, fish begins rotting from the head. You asked about the Smith-Usman case. The Smith-Usman case could not be pursued at that point in time because of politicization, because it was tied to IEBC. And people like Chirchir were in it, and the people felt that if these people are indicted, then it is an indictment on IEBC. But are we ready to go the whole distance? For example, are we as a country ready to investigate the troubles around Kenya Airways and find out who owns the planes at Kenya Airways? Are we willing to get to the bottom of the managed equipment scheme and find out who are the persons who supplied this equipment? Are we willing to get to the bottom of Weston, where the number 2 in this country has admitted to handling stolen property?
Is the Senate and the committee that you chair willing and ready to do that?
Yes, we are. In fact, right now, the managed equipment scheme is a matter that is before the Health Committee. Kenya Airways, remember, Anyang' Nyong'o chaired a committee that came up with certain recommendations, and even other issues that touch on devolution. We are well seized of it. But are we ready to implement? Because that's where the problem is. You have good recommendations, but no one wants to implement them because maybe you are the one who owns the planes, or maybe you are the one who supplied the medical equipment, or maybe it's your sister who supplied the containers that have been, that have scandalized the health sector.
Dr. Chris, we need to move on, but I need your closing remarks on this specific case. So we are saying, as Senator Ledama says, that the 3 arms of government need to work together. The handshake has helped in terms of fighting corruption. But how has politicizing, politicking affected the fight that we have on corruption? The reason why I ask this is also the questioning of the excitement that we lack when it comes to prosecuting people or individuals who have been mentioned. One key example is that you take a look at the HELB issue. After Samina Mohammed said that every young Kenyan who hasn't paid their HELB, we will come after you. Why do we not see the same excitement, the same thorough excitement when it comes to corruption? You see cases that have been prolonged for years.
I'll start by saying, initially I said that the senator's argument was misplaced. And it was misplaced in the sense that you can't say the laws are discriminatory. What is there the challenge when it comes to implementation? As a matter of fact, when it comes to matters of fighting corruption, we've actually over-legislated. And the comparison he gave, you know, there are two different offices. There's one which is elective and there's one which is appointive. So you need to get the difference. And the principle of innocent until proven guilty. A governor is a CEO of that particular county. And for heaven's sake, the investigation is still going on. They'll still go to court, of course. And after the matter has been concluded. But when it comes to appointive position...
just before you cross over, Dr. Chris, just a moment, Senator. When you say that elective versus appointive, you see, for the Kenyan who is expecting service delivery, they don't care about that. They're just worried. People who are managing their affairs, why, if you have issues of corruption, your profile has been questioned, why can't you just pave way?
Now, this is what the DPP has been fighting. And we need to give him room, where he said, anybody who has been implicated should step aside. And when you look at the value of stepping aside in this case, if the court sees that you are likely to interfere with the going on investigations, you must step aside. For instance, I'm a member of parliament, and maybe you're involved in a corrupt case and you are legislating on the floor of the house. I mean, how is that going to interfere? But when it comes to executive, where they're in charge, of implementation, for instance, like for example, when you talk of a CEO of a county, this is a governor, obviously, with the powers he has and the jurisdiction he comes from, he's likely to interfere with the issue of investigations. So and that's why the DPP said, that he's trying to push, and this was the issue of the Deputy Chief Justice, that anybody who has been implicated and is likely to interfere with the going on investigations should step aside. You know, that's what he said. Let me just and secondly, I've not finished. You should do the listening.
No, but you are repeating yourself and eating your point.
You asked a question. You asked me a question. I want to come and answer the question that you've asked. The corruption in this country, it is supposed to be multi-approach. There's no one agency of the government that is DCI or DPP. They must collaborate together between the DCI, the DPP, and the courts. And when you come to the three arms of government, where my brother says should work together, you should not work together. The agencies of government, when we talk about legislature, executive, and the judiciary, they are there to check each other. You know? So the issue of checking each other means...
Mweshima, what do you think about Chapter 6?
On the matters of integrity...
That you should not do anything that brings dishonor to the office that you hold?
That one applies across the board.
So what do you say about governors, elective people in elective positions, when they're implicated in some of these matters?
And they return to office.
There's no law that bars them, by the way, unless we put it in place.
Okay,
what is there's no law?
Can I just respond
there's no
to
law
this?
At all. What is
I
there?
have to respond
it
to
is
this.
It's in the Officers Ethics Act, actually, which was passed, and it said that if you've been implicated and you are likely to interfere with the investigation, you should step aside. And the president, when it came to the floor of the house and mentioned the names of the people who had been implicated to step aside, it was at his discretion. And he's the appointing authority. When the CSS, Kina Chirchir, were told to step aside, he got a list from the ESCC, and the ESCC, unfortunately at that particular time, it was still at the introductory phase.
In fact, let me tell you something.
Absolutely.
I really hope Kenyans who are watching are listening carefully. Because what we are trying to ensure here is a fiduciary responsibility. I don't give a hoot in hell whether you are elected or appointed. So long as you've been accused of misappropriating public funds, you step aside. And when we talk about the amendments to the Constitution, that is the one thing that we must come up with.
But there's no law.
It doesn't matter whether there's a law. It behooves you to respect the will of the people. People are rotting in hospitals because there are no drugs in those hospitals. And then you come and sit here, Chris, and tell me that, oh, because I'm a public officer, I'm a governor. If I'm a governor and I'm accused of corruption, I step aside. So in my view, what is there is this. It is very clear. We are not going to win this war on corruption if we are going to let people like Chris Omala
bring a law in place. You are a
it
senator.
Is not about bringing
You've not brought any law.
The issue,
there's
my
no
friend,
law at all. Bring the laws.
Let me tell you. In fact, as I sit here as a senator, I'm one of the people who have drafted 5 legislation in my first term.
They have failed.
Okay, you understand? So, Chris, let me break it down for you. What you need to do.
I've not seen your law anywhere in the National Assembly.
You need to be very. No, let me finish this. Kenyans out there need to understand that when they start thinking with the thinking of Chris Omala, we will never win the war.
Which laws have you brought on the floor of the House that have been ascended?
What I said is very simple. What I said is very simple. The 3 arms of government ought to work together in the sense that we, in the legislative arm of government, if we pass a resolution, the executive must implement it. The judiciary must also be able to look at the legislation properly. We have an issue of Salai. We had a very credible report that we passed. We adopted in the House. It has not been implemented.
You have just
so it's got to be implemented.
Which
I have 5 legislation.
You know, when somebody writes to the speaker, that's not a legislation. He needs to know.
Excuse
me. How many laws have been ascended?
You know, the problem with this young man, he thinks that the Senate works the same way as the National Assembly.
No. Which law have you?
Zinzi has asked me a very simple question. Number 1, I have drafted the law. In fact, when you look at the page, and they're already on the 3rd reading, my friend.
Yeah. So you've drafted the law, but they haven't passed it.
Yes. No. So it is not. You know what you need to understand.
I can name the laws that have brought up in ascended.
No. Zinzi has asked a very simple question.
No, which is okay.
Which I must respond. This gentleman is trying to beat the chest to show he knows what he's talking about.
The issue is this.
The way legislation works is that we draft legislation, we pass in the Senate, and they go to the National Assembly. We in the Senate have been very gracious. We've passed a lot of legislation that have come from the National Assembly. Last week, we passed 2 or 3 of them. But then, once we send our legislation to the National Assembly, they are either put in the dustbin or they are never looked at.
When it comes to legislation,
allow me to
National Assembly
has passed talk about the substantive issues.
So you can't be up here, you've done a draft, and you say you've passed a law. A law has been assented by the President. Yes, that's
law.
0.
So we agreed on that. Draft legislation is
not the law.
A law. That's fine. So in 60 seconds.
We have chapter 6. You don't even need additional legislation.
Thank you.
There are gaps in existing laws, and those gaps can be plugged, not just by Ledama, but Chris Wamalo as well, because he also has the same platform. But the philosophy that we're building in this country is wrong. It's not going to help us to win this war. Where we believe that everything must be solved through a legal process, where we believe that the solution to every problem in this country is enactment of another law. I would not be surprised if someone comes up and says, let's scrap chapter 6 in the upcoming referendum. But I still maintain it is all about leadership. It cannot be right for the country to be treated to a situation where cabinet secretaries are being probed for bribery and they're still in office. It does not require a law. We have seen in the Me Too scandals in the US. Just the other day, the governor of Virginia is in a lot of problems because of things he did in his teenage duration. It is about values and ethos and principles. It is not an issue of the law. And today, we must challenge the president. If his cabinet is being probed on allegations of bribery, then they should be allowed to have a situation where it does not appear as if they are interfering. We in Parliament, and I know someone will ask that, Kajwang, your committee was accused of bribery in the last Parliament. What did we do? We submitted ourselves to the Powers and Privileges Committee that carried out investigations and rendered a judgment. If we had been called upon to step aside, we would have stepped aside with or without an enabling legislation.